On the morning they found her, she was sitting upright against a pine tree with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes open, watching something in the tree line that the rescue team couldn't see. She had been missing for 11 days. She was 9 years old, and the first thing she said, before she said her own name, before she said she was thirsty, before she said anything about where she had been, was a question that nobody on that mountain knew how to answer. She asked if the gray one had made it home. Search and Rescue Coordinator Broderick Hall-I had been doing this work for 22 years. He had found people in states that stayed with him. He had found people who did not survive and people who barely did. A set of expectations about what a found person looks like, what they say, how their mind works after that kind of time alone in that kind of cold. He told the reporter who interviewed him 3 weeks later that Mia Calloway broke every single one of those expectations. Not because of what she had survived, but because of what she described. What she described should not have been there. There had not been a confirmed wolf sighting in that stretch of the Absaroka Range in over 30 years. The wildlife biologists would say that later, carefully, with caveats and qualifications. The rangers would say it too. But that is the end of the story, and the end is not where this begins. This begins 3 weeks before they found her, in a green pickup truck on a dirt road, with a mother who was trying very hard not to show her daughter that she had been crying. The mountains looked the same in October as they always had, which was both the thing she needed and the thing that undid her. She had grown up in Wyoming. Mia was in the passenger seat with her boots on the dashboard, which Reeve had stopped correcting. It was the expression Colt used to get when they drove this road. A particular kind of attention, the kind that wasn't just looking but receiving. Like the mountains were transmitting something that most people were tuned out of. She was so much like him. He had been alone. The investigation found no fault with the terrain and no fault with his equipment, and reached the, which was not a conclusion that did anything useful for Reeve or for Mia, but was the conclusion they were given. He had been 41 years old. He had been the kind of man who other men called quietly when something was wrong with an animal and they didn't know what to do. He had been the kind of man who left notes in the margins of his books and put wildflowers on the kitchen table and remembered the names of every person he had ever met. He had also been keeping something from Reeve, not out of dishonesty, out of a complicated and ultimately unresolvable tension between his work and her worry. She didn't know yet what she would find about that. That knowledge was still 2 weeks away, sitting in a filing cabinet in his old office that she had not been able to open since his death. What she knew that October morning was that she was driving to the same trail they had camped at every year since Mia was born, because Colt had loved it, and because Mia loved it, and because stopping would have felt like something she wasn't ready to call by its real name. She had packed the same tent. Only that she did. Mia heading toward the mountains was usually a commentary, a string of observations, a running account of everything she was seeing. The silence sat differently. Reeve asked her if she was okay. Mia said she was fine. She said it in the way that 9-year-olds say it when they don't want to explain something they can't quite name. And Reeve left it there because she understood that feeling better than almost any other. They parked at the trailhead at 9:30 in the morning. The lot was mostly empty, which was typical for a Thursday in October when the summer hikers had gone and the winter hadn't fully arrived yet. She wrote it in her neat handwriting and thought, as she always did when she signed this logbook, that Colt had signed it too, the last time. The last time was in a different October. His name was still there, 2 pages back. She had not looked. Moving with the loose-jointed confidence of a child who has been on trails since before she could name what she was on. She knew which roots to step over and which to use as footholds. She knew to look up in the aspens for the light coming through. She stopped twice to look at something, and both times it was something real. A pileated woodpecker the first time, and the second time, further along, a set of elk tracks so fresh the mud was still settling. She said it the way she sometimes said things like that, simply as a statement of fact, without the weight that Reeve always felt when the same thought arrived in her own mind. Children carried grief differently, like it fit somewhere in her that adults didn't have room for anymore. The site was a clearing at the edge of a meadow with the mountains above it, and a creek to the east that was still running cold and clear. The flat rock near the creek where Colt used to sit in the mornings was there. Mia went to that rock without being told and sat on it and looked at the water, and Reeve set up the tent without watching her, because watching would have made it something she couldn't hold. That night, the temperature dropped faster than the forecast had suggested. She lay still for a moment listening, running through the checks she always ran. Tent staked, food hung, Mia's bag zipped. The last one she reached for by instinct and found empty canvas. She was out of the tent in 4 seconds. The clearing was pale with moonlight. The fire had gone to coals. The creek was audible 30 yards away, and nothing else was. No wind now, no movement. Mia's boots were gone from outside the tent door, which meant she had been awake enough to put them on, which meant this was not sleepwalking, which meant something else entirely, and none of the alternatives felt better than the others. Reeve called her name once, and then stopped herself from calling again, because the silence that came back was the kind that made you feel your own voice was the wrong thing to be adding to it. She got her headlamp and her jacket. She took 10 seconds to look at every edge of the clearing. On the east side, toward the creek, the grass was pressed down in a path. She followed it. She searched for 4 hours alone before she accepted that she needed to get back to the trailhead and call for help, which meant 6 miles of trail in the dark, which meant leaving without Mia, even after everything else resolved, because the rational mind and the mother's body do not run on the same fuel, and they do not reach the same conclusions. She ran most of it. She was at the trailhead by 6:30 in the morning with no cell signal, and it took another 40 minutes of driving before the bars came back. Search and rescue was mobilized by 8. He asked about Maya's health, her temperament, her experience on trails. He asked about the timeline, the temperature, the direction of the pressed grass. He noted everything. He told Reeve, without promising, that the first 24 hours were the most important. She did not tell him that she already knew that. Northeast was elevation. The dogs circled and came back to Broderick and sat, which was a specific thing they did when there was nothing more to give him. He widened the search. He called for aerial support, which arrived the following afternoon in the form of a helicopter that flew grids over the drainage for 3 days and found nothing, which was not unusual, because the Absaroka Range does not reveal what it holds, simply because you are looking from above. Reeve stayed at the trailhead. She called Colt's sister in Colorado, who drove up the second day and sat with her in a way that didn't require explanation. On the 4th day, a wildlife biologist named Greta Sorensen drove up from the state office in Cody because someone in the chain of command had mentioned the northeast drainage and the possibility of a child moving into higher terrain. And Greta knew that drainage specifically because she had been monitoring it for 18 months as part of a corridor study. She mentioned this to Broderick in a way that was careful and qualified. She said she had been picking up some anomalous data from the area. Signal interference, she called it. Sensor noise. She said it probably wasn't relevant. Broderick asked her to be less careful with her language. She said there were signatures in the data that were consistent with large predator movement in the northeast corridor. She said the signatures were unclear and could be instrument error, and she had not filed a formal report because the data wasn't clean. He asked what kind of large predator. She said she wasn't certain. She said there had been no confirmed sightings in the area, but that absence of confirmation was not the same as absence. She said she felt he should know. He stared at her for a moment and then asked her to pull everything she had. That night, Alone in her truck, Reeve sat with her phone and looked at pictures of Mia without making a sound. She had a specific ritual for the worst hours of the night, which was to choose one good memory and stay inside it until the light changed. A real one, with a small mound and a flat rock with a mark scratched into it. He had looked at Reeve over Mia's head with an expression that was almost painful in its completeness, in what it contained. She had that picture on her phone. When a man named Fen Aldridge would drive 6 hours from a cabin near the Burtooth Wilderness to stand in front of her at the trailhead and tell her something about her husband that she had never known. That knowledge was still coming toward her. On the 6th day of the search, the grid was expanded again, and a team working the northeast drainage at elevation found something that Broderick Hawley photographed carefully before touching. It was a child's sock, blue with a small owl on the ankle, damp but intact, caught on a branch at the edge of a rocky outcropping. Because the terrain looked impassable from above, which was a perspective problem, not a terrain problem. She said yes before he finished showing her the photograph. The team was redirected into the valley. A small body's impression in the dirt. Chewed pine bark, which is something a cold and hungry child will do, and which told him she was moving with intention. Marks on one rock face that looked deliberate. A series of small lines, scratch marks, not frantic, methodical. In each of these sheltered positions, at the edge of the space nearest the opening, there were other marks in the soft earth. A pattern of movement that circled the perimeter and then settled repeatedly at the entrance. He photographed everything. He did not tell Reeve about the secondary prints. Not yet. He wasn't sure what telling her would do. What he did instead was call Greta Sorensen and describe what he had found. There was a silence on the line that lasted longer than silences usually lasted with her. She asked him to send her the photographs. He sent them. She called back in an hour and said she needed to come back up. He said come. This is the part of the story that nobody tells cleanly, because it involves things that are difficult to hold together. Facts that belong to different categories of understanding that don't usually share the same sentence. Greta Sorensen was a scientist. She had a doctorate in wildlife ecology. She had spent 15 years studying large predator behavior in the northern Rockies, and she had a specific, trained skepticism about the tendency to anthropomorphize animal behavior, to read intention where there was only instinct, to assign meaning to proximity. She would say that in the report. In private, standing in that narrow valley with the prints at her feet and the photographs on her phone and the math of 11 days and 9 degrees Fahrenheit in her head, he was somewhere past 60, lean in the way of people who live alone in physical landscapes, with gray at his temples and a way of standing that suggested he was more comfortable in open space than enclosed. She went to him anyway, because she was going to anyone who had anything, because that was the only currency she had left. He said he had worked with Colt. She said she knew most of the people Colt worked with, from the Forestry Service, from the university, from the Watershed Project. He said it wasn't any of those. She said she wasn't in a position to have feelings about much of anything right now, except finding her daughter, and so he should show her what he had. He had a folder. It was old, a physical folder with paper documents inside, which already told her something about the era it came from. He handed her a sheet at a time, quietly, watching her read. What she read was a project outline. A formal proposal, dated 7 years ago, for a gray wolf monitoring and soft release program in the Absaroka Range corridor, funded through a private conservation trust and operating independently of the State Wildlife Agency, which was why it had not intersected with any of the official programs she knew about. The rationale was corridor connectivity, recodify potential, genetic diversity. The methodology was careful and thorough, and written in Colt's specific voice, which she would have recognized anywhere. The way he built an argument, the way he justified, the way he accounted for risk. The project lead was listed as Colt Calloway. The secondary researcher was listed as Fenwick Aldridge. She turned pages. She found photographs, field photographs, of animals in the study. One animal in particular appeared across dozens of images, an adult male gray wolf, large even by the standards of his species, with a tracking collar, photographed at different sites across the drainage she was looking at right now. In ink that was unmistakably Colt's handwriting, someone had written a name, not a scientific designation. A name, Gray. She put the folder down. Because the thing that happens to a person when they discover that someone they loved was carrying something large and real and secret is not simple. He said Colt had been afraid she would worry, that the program had no official state sanction, which meant if something went wrong, there was no institutional protection. He said Colt had planned to tell her once the program had enough data to be formalized. He said the accident had happened before that. She asked where the animal was now. He said he had lost track of the collar signal about 18 months ago. The collar's battery had a 5-year life, and they were past that. He had no way of knowing if the animal was still in the range. He paused. He said he had driven up because when he heard the name Calloway on the news, he had checked the drainage coordinates against his last known data point for Way A07, and they were the same corridor. He said he didn't know what that meant. He said he thought she should know. Reeves stood at the edge of the parking lot with the folder in her hands and the mountains in front of her, and she did not cry because she was storing everything, every piece of this, in a place where it couldn't move yet, couldn't reach the rest of her, because the rest of her had a different job right now. She asked Broderick to let Fenn join the search. He agreed after 3 minutes of conversation with Fenn that she was not part of. On the 9th day, he was reading movement patterns, corridors, the logic of an animal navigating a landscape at altitude in October. He knew this drainage. He had spent years in it. He knew where the shelter was, where the wind dropped, where the water ran reliable in fall. He came back at dusk and said nothing definitive. He said if the animal was who he thought it was, it would not have gone higher in this weather. It would have worked the lower edges of the drainage, near the creek that fed from below, where the deer moved and the temperature was survivable. He said if. He said it like a man who had spent years being careful about certainty and had arrived at a moment where he was still trying to be careful, but the pressure of caring was winning. Broderick redirected a team to the lower drainage at first light on the 10th day. They did not find her on the 10th day. The 10th day was the day that Reeve went to pieces for the first and only time during those 11 days, quietly, alone in the truck. She looked at every photograph of the animal Colt had called Gray, studying the photographs in the fading light the way she had once studied the man who took them, looking for the thing that had mattered to him, trying to understand through evidence what she hadn't been able to understand through conversation. In the last photograph in the folder, a trail camera image from 3 years ago, the wolf was looking directly into the lens. The timestamp in the corner read 4:17. Whatever had triggered the camera had also held his attention. He was standing still, ears forward. She had spent years in this landscape. She looked at that photograph for a long time. She didn't know what she was looking for. She wasn't sure she found it, but she kept looking. On the 11th morning, at 6:47 in the morning, the team working the lower drainage northeast of the creek fork found her. She was sitting upright against a pine tree with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes open, watching something in the tree line that the rescue team couldn't see. The team leader, a woman named Carries, who had been doing this work for 8 years, would say later that in her experience, found people usually collapsed inward when they were reached, that the relief overwhelmed them, that they stopped holding themselves up. She said Mia did not do this. She said Mia looked at them when they reached her with an expression that was tired and a little wary and very present, and that her first response to being found was not relief but concern. concern about something else, about whether the gray one had made it home. Carries had not known, in that moment, what that meant. She had radioed it in because she radioed everything in. The careful questions about where she hurt and how she was breathing. Mia had a core temperature that was low but not critical. She had the early stages of dehydration. She had a small cut on her left hand that had been improbably wrapped in a strip of fabric torn from the inside of her jacket. A competent improvised bandage that Carries noted because 9-year-olds. Mia said the gray one had a cut on his leg at the beginning. And what happened between them is not something that translates cleanly into description. It was a reunion that had 11 days of a particular kind of cold in it, the kind of cold that is not just temperature. And it happened at the edge of a parking lot with mountains behind it in the early morning light. And it was private in a way that the people who witnessed it understood and looked away from. After the hospital, after the fluids in the scans and the warming blankets and the doctor who said she was going to be fine with a conviction that still took an hour to absorb. After Reeve sat next to her bed and held her hand and watched her sleep. After all of that, when Mia was awake and warm and herself again, when the color had come back into her face and she had eaten and the nurse had stopped coming in every 30 minutes, Reeve asked her. She said, as carefully as she could, "Tell me what happened out there." Mia was quiet for a moment in the way she went quiet when she was organizing something. Then she said she had woken up because she heard something outside the tent, and she had thought it might be an elk because they had seen the tracks earlier, and she had gone to look, which she said she knew now she should not have done, but she had wanted to see it. She said she saw a light instead, not a lamp, not a flashlight. She said it was like the light that comes through aspens, which was the way she described it, and she had followed it without deciding to follow it. She said when she realized how far she had gone, it was dark in a different way, and she couldn't tell which direction led back. She said she was scared. She said that was when she saw the gray one for the first time. She said he was very large. She said he was sitting at the edge of a rocky space, and he looked at her the way a thing looks at you when it has been waiting. Reeve kept her face still. Mia said she knew it was a wolf. She said she had read about wolves, and she knew she was supposed to be afraid. She could find was that he didn't feel like something that wanted to harm her. She said he felt like something that knew where she was and was deciding what to do about it. She said he had turned and walked northeast and stopped and looked back at her. She said she had followed him, which was the paradox that would make this story hard to explain to people who wanted it to be simpler than it was. She had been cold every night except the coldest nights, which was the nights when the animal was closest to her. She had been hungry most of the time. Who was pretending not to listen, put her hand over her mouth. She said he showed her where the water was. She said he did not show her with language, but by going and coming back and going again. She said she understood that animals communicated this way and that most people didn't pay attention to it, with his back to the inside. She said she talked to him a lot. She said he had never talked back for a long time with his ears forward, and then he had turned and come back and stood in front of her, and she had felt. She said she had understood that he needed to go. She said she had also understood that she was going to be found soon. She said she didn't know how she knew that. She said she had cried a little and then stopped. She said before he left, he had pressed the side of his head against her hand one time and then turned and went northeast into the trees. She asked again, more quietly this time, looking at her mother, if Reeve thought he had. Reeve looked at her daughter in the hospital bed, warm now, with the color back in her face. This child who was so much like her father that it still sometimes stopped her breathing, and she thought about what to say. And what she decided to say was not the full truth, and not a lie, but something in between, something that left room for what she didn't know. She said she thought he probably had. She said she thought he knew these mountains well. 3 days after Mia came home, Reeve went to the filing cabinet in Colt's office. She had the key. She found the one for the year he died, and she opened it to the last entry, which was dated 3 days before his accident. It was a short entry. 4 lines. He had written, "For the UIA-07, observed the G-site coordinates at 2240. Moved south toward lower drainage. Signal strong. Collared adult gray males have been documented maintaining territory ranges of up to 300 square miles in this ecosystem. If pack forms in corridor, this individual will likely serve as founding male." There were 4 lines, and then there were 2 more, below a small space that suggested a pause, a moment between the professional notation and whatever came next. The last 2 lines were not part of the field record. She stood there until the light changed and her legs told her to sit, and she sat in his chair at his desk and held the notebook the way you hold something that is the last of something. She was not sure what he had meant exactly. She was not sure whether he had been writing about the corridor, about the Volz range, about some specific logistical detail of the study. If I can't be back in time, at least he knows the way. And she thought about a 9-year-old girl alone in the dark, following something north, following something she couldn't have named, following something that led her to water, to shelter, to warmth, and finally to the edge of a rocky shelf below which a search team was moving through a narrow valley on the 11th morning. She thought about that for a long time. Greta Sorensen would publish a paper 14 months later in a peer-reviewed journal of animal behavior, analyzing the track evidence, the behavioral pattern, the documented thermal impressions, the movement data from the corridor sensors. The paper was careful and scientific and contained the kind of qualifications that scientific papers require. Documented behavior was consistent with known wolf responses to vulnerable prey and was not, though the mechanism remained unclear. The paper was noted in the wildlife science community, and then, more broadly, it spread. It spread because someone uploaded the abstract with a summary to a forum, and someone else found it and wrote about it without the qualifications, in which the journalist asked him if he believed the wolf had protected the girl. He said he didn't use the word believe in his professional life and wasn't about to start in his retirement. He said the gap between those 2 facts was something he was comfortable leaving open. The journalist asked if he had a personal opinion. He said he had a lot of personal opinions. He said that one he was going to keep. Fen Aldridge went back to his cabin near the Bertooth. He sent Reeve the complete project files, all of them, 7 years of documentation, and a note that said Colt had always meant for the full record to be preserved somewhere. He said he thought she should have it. She read all of it. It took her 2 weeks. There were hundreds of photographs of Gray, across seasons, across years, at different points along the corridor, and extended northeast across the divide toward the Bertooth Wilderness. There was a photograph from a trail camera, time-stamped 2 years ago, 11 months after Colt's death, showing Gray at the G-site coordinates that Colt had noted in his last entry, sitting, looking directly into the camera. The timestamp read 4:17. She recognized it. The animal had still been there, in the same place. She put the photograph face up on the desk and sat back. She thought about what it meant that the animal had been there, still monitoring the same coordinates, still moving the same corridor, still alive and present in the landscape that Colt had mapped for it. She thought about what it meant that her daughter had followed that animal for 11 days and come back. She did not have a word for what she thought. She had sat with enough uncertainty by now to know that some things do not resolve into language, that some things stay in a different register, in the part of you that is not vocabulary and not logic, but something older and less articulable. She picked the photograph back up, with whatever it is that looks like recognition in a face that is not a human face. Mia was doing her homework at the kitchen table. The sound of her moving through the house was the same sound it had always been. Ordinary, reassuring, the specific sound of a living child. Reeve looked at the photograph one more time. Then she wrote the date on the back of it and the coordinates and set it beside the notebook. And neither of those things explained anything at all. But she thought Colt would have wanted them in the same place. She thought he would have liked that they had found each other. And she thought, with a quietness that had no grief in it, only something that sat beside grief, the way a large thing sits beside a fire, that the last entry in his notebook had not been about the wolf after all. She thought it had been about Mia. She thought it had been about Mia all along.